Brilliant. Hey, everyone. Hope everyone is well. I want to welcome everyone to our third event of this year for our April community event with Spiral Blue. Today, we've invited George Dyke and Stephen Ward will also be presenting for a little bit, both from Symbiosis Communications. I'll hand it over to Taufik, the CEO and founder of Spiral Blue, to give a rundown of what we do and why we're running these events.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gavin. Thank you so much for organizing these, as always. So at Spiral Blue, our goal is really to further Earth observation, democratize things a bit. I think you've probably heard me say this a few times, but our focus is on space edge computing, which should help drop costs, make things more flexible, all that sort of good stuff. So our goal for these events is really, we want to build a community consisting of people such as yourself that are either working in GIS or have an interest in it, or looking to find a job or anything, or any of the above. We want to bring everyone together and see how we can grow together, grow the industry, just as we have ourselves been growing over the past few years. We've gotten a lot of benefits from attending these sorts of events in the past, both in the sort of space industry and Earth observation industry, as well as other sort of general events. So this is really us giving back. And I think one thing I would want to mention, apologies if my signal is a bit poor. One thing I would want to mention is that we are currently hiring at Spiral Blue. So plug for our spiralblue.space/careers page, particularly looking for a software engineer at the moment. So send through an application if you're interested. I'll hand it back to Gavin.
Brilliant. Yeah. So with these events, we really wanted to get people to network and meet each other. So how the event will be structured tonight is that we'll have George speak from 6:20, in a couple of minutes. We'll have him chat for about half an hour, and then this will be followed by a Q&A with Taufik and George. And so if you want, you can put your questions in the chat below throughout the night. Or as well, you can during the session, we'll have you can speak up and just ask your question. Afterwards, this will be followed by a meet and greet with everyone. So during the session, we'll go back to the lounge, and we'll have a bit of a facilitator from Symbiosis and Spiral Blue. He'll be there to help facilitate the conversation, and hopefully by the end of today, you get to come up with new ideas to develop partnerships or learn something new at the end of this event. And so we're really, really grateful to have you all come. It's a really good turnout tonight. And don't be shy. Feel free to ask as many questions with each other. And so, yeah, during the lounge room, you feel free to move amongst each of the tables, but I'll go into that in a little bit. But yeah, without further ado, to Taufik, we'll do a short intro for George.
Yep, so tonight we're joined by George Dyke. So George has worked in the space industry since 1999, and since 2004 he's worked as a consultant with the Sydney-based Symbiosis Communications. Symbiosis is a supporter of the international Earth observation community, including via policy analysis and inputs, community coordination, and technology studies. Their domestic clients include CSIRO and Geoscience Australia, and internationally, they currently work with space agencies, including ESA, NASA, JAXA, USGS, and ISRO on EO coordination activities. So that's how you know someone is doing really well, where you just pop out all of the different acronyms. So with that, I would like to hand it over to George to get things started. A round of applause for George.
Ooh, round of applause.
Oh, yes, there's emojis at the bottom.
All right. Well, look, thanks very much, Taufik, for the introduction. And I want to say thanks to Gavin and Taufik and Spiral Blue for, making these kind of opportunities. I think there's a lot going on in space right now in Australia, and we need these sub-communities building and thriving to make the most of it. So, yeah, it's great to have this chance. I see a lot of familiar faces and some totally new faces, which is really great as well. So welcome, everybody, and thanks for taking the time. As Taufik said, I've been working in the space industry since 1999. I have a mathematics and mechanical engineering background, and I started in space robotics. But in 2004, I moved over to Australia from Canada originally, and I also started working in the Earth observation field. Along the way, I've also been involved in the International Space University, and so I know some of the people online from there, and also did a web startup, which was kind of unrelated to Earth observation, but was a really useful way to learn a lot of things as a co-founder, how startups can go, as a co-developer, how to build something from the ground up. So that was a really fun experience, which helped me out along the way. So I'll really quickly, I guess, just review this schedule. We're going to have a half an hour, so I hope you've got a stiff drink. And then we'll do a Q&A and table chats afterwards. What I really want to talk about is some of the drivers of Earth observation applications that we see in our work at Symbios. I've tried to focus on the last 12 to 18 months. We've done work over that period for both government and the commercial sectors. And, we've seen a lot of different things developing along the way. And so we'll talk about some drivers, and then we'll also talk at the end about some platforms, including the Open Data Cube, which we have Alex Leith, at least. I'm not sure if anyone else from Open Data Cube is on, but Alex Leith, we've worked quite a bit with him on Open Data Cube, and he's a really valuable resource on that platform if you want to chat with him at the tables afterwards. So by way of introduction, I wanted to say something about Symbios. Taufik alluded to it before, but we are a micro consultancy. It's basically Stephen Ward is the founder of Symbios. Matt Steventon and myself have worked with Symbios for a long time now. We generally work for national space agencies or larger companies, and we're focused a lot on international coordination activities and policy, and that's all basically in the Earth observation space. We have some foundational work ongoing for a number of years now with the European Space Agency, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Also with JAXA in Japan and with NASA in the US. And we've been working with them for quite a long time now on their international coordination of Earth observation. We've done work domestically with CSIRO. I'm not sure if we have anyone from CSIRO on, but as well as Geoscience Australia. And a lot of that's been focused around CEOS, the Committee on Earth Observing Satellites, and GEO, the Group on Earth Observations, which are key international coordination groups in the Earth observation space. One of the foundational bits of work that we do for ESA is publish the Earth Observation Handbook, and you can find them online. There's also a database of missions there that we update by surveying space agencies. And I guess this is a way for me of identifying what we think are three of the kind of key drivers for Earth observation applications. So in 2015, we did an edition of the handbook on climate, and that was targeted at the COP21 meeting, which eventually led to the Paris Agreement. Not our handbook, the COP21 meeting led to it. Also in 2015 was a handbook edition for the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which was a UN conference planning their next 10 years of activities in disaster risk reduction. And then in 2018 around the Sustainable Development Goals. We plan to do another edition of this in the near future, but I guess these three have really cast our view of what's really driving Earth observation. And in each case, what we're trying to do is explain to a policy audience what the role and capabilities of Earth observation satellites might be for their area of interest. So if you want to read a bit more, you can find those online, and we're always happy to talk about them as well. So I put this in because I promised postcards. This is taken in 2015. It's a bit of an homage to the 1968 Apollo 8 Earthrise. But I think for me today, it helps a couple ways. First of all, I think it shows the contrast between a gray, black and white moon and, a colorful, dynamic and vibrant Earth. And, I think taking care of the planet, taking care of the climate, taking care of disasters and sustainable development goals is really vital to keeping Earth vibrant. And we're not that far away. I'm not saying we're going to turn into the moon, but we're not that far away from really putting everything out of balance in an irreparable way. So I think that's one of the key drivers that I have for Earth observation. And the other thing I take away from this picture is that often in Earth observation, we find satellites provide an objective view. And very often you have to leave a place and look back at it in order to really objectively see what's going on. And we always see that with satellite data, whether it's changes in the land, changes in the ocean, in the atmosphere. These objective measurements that are provided by Earth observation from outside of the Earth are really valuable in informing decisions and decision makers around the world. And so we think that's really a key role for Earth observation satellites. It keeps coming up every time. So I put this concept for the talk together in January, I promise. Taufik and I sat down in Penrith, Westfield and had a coffee. But just last week, the Space News released their April edition, and it pretty much did a great job of summarizing a lot of what I wanted to say. So I would really encourage you to actually have a look at this if you're interested in Earth observation and what is really driving it. You can see in the budget changes that the Biden administration has made. They've added an additional $250 million to the NASA Earth Science budget overnight, $500 million for NOAA, all focused on observing climate from space. And so, we think this is a really big validation of the importance of these observations in planning for climate change, mitigation, as well as adaptation. And, we see things like the greenhouse gas constellation, which is something we work on regularly. Stephen was up until midnight last night on a call talking about something very related. And I think it's a highly relevant and important and really a key driver for Earth observation that we're seeing. I wanted to zoom in a little bit on the ESG, which is environment, social, and governance. It's a bit of a buzzword, I suppose. I don't know much about it, but I have followed the impact investing world a little bit, and I know that these outcomes are becoming more and more popular and important for financial managers. And you see the likes of BlackRock, which manages $9 trillion in assets, saying that ESG is going to be part of their every decision that they make on investments. So, there's real business and financial opportunities. And this VP from Planet is saying, if it's on the balance sheet, if nature's on the balance sheet, then that really puts space and satellites in play because, the remote sensing provides global images, scalable, low friction, which I take to mean the information can be collected without having to gather it from a national government. National interest is great, but it can apply a lot of biases in reporting mechanisms. And so you can get images from 180 plus countries and they're objective measurements. And the other thing we see as really important, I think related to this ESG space, is open data policies. So there's a lot of countries in the world that don't have access to space data or don't have the capability to access space data. And so we see open data and open tools and open platforms as a really key driver for maximizing the potential of Earth observation. I think without that, we end up with a lot of data sitting in databases and not getting applied to problems. So open data is very key. As I mentioned, we've done work on the Sustainable Development Goals. In addition to the handbook, Matt on our team put together this publication for JAXA as a contribution to GEO around Earth observations in support of the SDGs. The SDGs are incredibly broad, and you could pick any axis you want, but it goes all the way from plastic in the ocean to world peace and everything in between. So I think the key message for Earth observation is that this is a really good collection of problem statements that can be used as a basis for interacting with the user community and also developing requirements and understanding their requirements. It's quite well structured. It's got targets and indicators and custodian agencies. So if you're interested in targeting your work, I find it's a pretty good framework. The other thing is that I think it gives us a common language. A friend of mine in Vancouver from university, he started a investment fund. They're raising their second fund now, and they're investing in companies that are trying to have an impact, a positive impact on the environment, climate, or the world, society around us. And when they evaluate their investments, they use the SDGs as a criteria for, not the only criteria, but a criteria. Which SDGs are you addressing, or could you be addressing? And so it's becoming a common language. We see the same thing in the foreign aid development area. A lot of those agencies, like the World Bank or Asian Development Bank, are using SDGs to communicate the impact that their investments and their foreign aid is having. The four that are highlighted here: zero hunger, clean water, sustainable cities, and life on land. Those are the four that CEOS has chosen to focus on so far. It's, I think, largely pragmatic. There were activities ongoing that they could use to plug into this, but it's just an indication of the kinds of things that we think Earth observations can help with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. Taking it a little bit closer to home, we've had a couple of canonical doom-scrolling disasters in Australia in the last couple of years. Just in March, we had historic flooding, highest levels in the Nepean Hawkesbury River since 1961, and obviously the rather large bushfires. I put this up because I think the example of the Nepean River and the flooding in Richmond and Windsor really goes to the fact that, this is the human-nature interface at work. And for these couple of weeks, the Nepean River decided that Richmond was a floodplain again. And no matter what kind of walls we build, it's always going to decide that Richmond and Windsor are floodplains. And so, we need to understand that interface and that boundary. And especially since it's pretty clear that if we want to do something on climate change, we need to, in David Attenborough's words, we need to rewild the earth. We need these forests to grow back, and we need the land to largely be restored to its, historical function, because that was a sustainable state. And so I think satellites and Earth observations are going to be really key for understanding that human-nature interface for some time to come, and I think this was a good example of it. These satellite images are not used day to day by decision makers, but they're certainly used by planners and people following up afterwards. I think another key point here from the Australian perspective is I left all the instruments on here. These are all foreign operated, owned instruments. GPM, Global Precipitation Mission, is Japan, US. Landsat and the Space Shuttle are obviously US. Sentinel is Europe. Himawari 8 is the Japanese Bureau of Meteorology. And so the point that's been made many, many times, and I'll make it again, is we have a huge foreign dependence here on Earth observations. And so that means we need to be good partners, and things like Open Data Cube can help us, do something real and contribute something real in those partnerships. So something to be very mindful of. I hope we can build more indigenous capabilities, but that's the reality right now. A little bit on, well, I didn't know what to call this, so I called it Australian government happenings. There's a parliamentary inquiry ongoing, and we see, when we work with space agencies and countries in other space agencies in other countries, we see that government is a key driver for Earth observation. It's a very good foundational customer. Often governments consume Earth observation services. It's a holder of many key data sets. So very often key data sets, whether they're Earth observations or others, are held by government. And so there needs to be a strong role and support in that. And so we see this parliamentary inquiry as being around implementation. So there was a Senate inquiry. They agreed strategically we need a space agency. They made a space agency, and this is about what it can do and how it can do it. So I would encourage you all to keep an eye on the technology roadmaps that the space agency is working on. There's 7 of them, including one on Earth observation, and that will be made public by the end of June. We've seen recently a study come out on satellite cross-calibration radiometry, and which even mentions a series of satellites. So I think it's an indication of possible priority. In there, it talks about calibration validation and the legacy and advantage that Australia has in that area as well. And water quality has also been identified, I think, as a key national concern, national need. And so, these are the kinds of things that I would see coming out of these processes. And, as Australian industry, I think we need to keep an eye on it. At the bottom, I sort of put a little summary of where I see the groups fitting. I think it's interesting that 2 groups in particular, but several, Earth Observation Australia and the Space Industry Association, I think are getting newfound influence. And I think it's worth paying attention to that. There's 2 reasons. One of them is resources are flowing to those groups. Space Industry Australia had a big success hosting the IAC. Earth Observation Australia has been asked to do some studies and work for the government. But overall, I think government needs a license to say that it's consulted the people, as it were. And so I think that's what these groups are. And other sub-communities, like Tawfiq has mentioned, with the Sydney Startup Cluster, for example, I think organizing voices in this community is helpful, not just for us, but also when a call comes from government for input or suggestions or a response. It's much more powerful to have a federated, organized response than just individual companies and organizations. So, there's a lot going on. At first, the space agency was exciting because you got a hat and a shirt and a pen, but we hope to see it get some projects and ideally some budget and start to engage Australian industry in building some of these things. So it's very much a watch this space from my perspective. So with the last sort of 10 minutes or so, I wanted to talk a little bit about platforms. I'm not sure if Trevor Dew joined in the end, but full credit to Trevor for putting us onto this infographic, which I'm sure has been seen by a few. On the left of the screen, there's a sort of outcomes of a study which talks about the size of the geospatial services industry. And, there's big numbers. There's a 400 billion in there. There's a trillion in there. There's 4 million jobs globally. The point is that the geospatial services industry is big and getting bigger. It was enabled by a lot of technology developments that started in the early 2000s with mobile technology, GPS tracking, those kinds of things. And there's a real opportunity for Earth observation to attach itself, to ride the coattails here, I think. And so that's really the play, is trying to get in on this industry and how, and channel its growth. And one of the the executives we talked to last year for a study, he said that their goal, their business plan, essentially is to take the kind of work that they're doing for geointelligence, the defense side, and bring it to the commercial and consumer market, because they see so much potential there that's not being sort of realized on the consumer side of things. And I think that's a pretty good analog. If you look back at the history of Oracle, the big database company in the US, they started out serving defense and then basically commercialized their database for business, industry, and civil activities, and it was a huge success. So I think that's the kind of analog we're looking at here. And I think platforms provide a channel to deliver those kind of services and that kind of impact, and also enable Earth observation to, leverage some of the mega trends that we're seeing. We're seeing huge capability growth, and I'll try and illustrate that a bit in the next slide. But we have Earth Engine in some ways showed the way. The DOS programs in Europe, we had a good look at them last year, and we thought Creo DOS was doing a really nice job of building a platform. Open Data Cube is a great framework, and as we were chatting beforehand with Alex, it's being picked up by people who are no longer asking for help. They're just picking it up and using it. So it's been a great contribution. There's any number of these platforms that are developing. This chart is a bit crazy. I wouldn't expect you to absorb all of it, but it's part of some research that was doing for an article on open data and the impact of open data. And I thought it was important to put everything on a timeline roughly from the year 2000, which was a while ago now, 21 years, but was a bit of a milestone in terms of, the mental framework for how everyone thinks about the world. And, in 2002, we had Terra and Aqua and Envisat launched. And in my mind, that was sort of the start of an open era of satellite data. In particular, Terra and Aqua had the direct broadcast from the meteorological heritage. And so you can still build an antenna and get Terra and Aqua data down, or more to the point, you can now go onto AWS and hire a ground station instance and get your own Terra and Aqua data down from the satellite as it flies over your head. 2008, we had the Landsat archive open. Before that, it was hard to get satellite data at all. And all of a sudden, we had access to millions of scenes. And we saw that mirrored, in some ways, Brazil was a leader there, but eventually they opened the Global Seaburst archive, and then the Sentinels came online and from Europe, and they are an absolute treasure trove of open data. So I think that's been a really exciting trend. And side by side with that, we have the absolute explosion of the internet. I look back at when AWS was initiated in 2000. I remember at that time, Linux releases started to become consumer grade, and the open source community was really, it existed well before the internet, but it was really enabled by the internet. We have mobile platforms coming online in 2007 and 8. GitHub was started. So we had a lot of ingredients that are now really paying off dividends. And down in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide is where I see this huge proliferation of platforms. We have the Open Data Queue, we have the DOSs, we have a number of commercial players. If you ever need to collaborate, we've found Sentinel Hub in Europe is really, really open and happy to chat and talk. So that's been great. And we have, the Digital Earth family, if we'll call it that, Australia and Africa. So that's, Alex might be able to tell us, but almost 30 million square kilometers of the Earth with systematic satellite data coverage. And we have Digital Earth Americas emerging now. So these platforms are really unlocking the value of these data sets. And I hope that this is just the beginning. And if you made this chart again in another 10 or 20 years' time, all this would be contained in a little black dot, and there would be a whole bunch of other outcomes that we haven't yet really anticipated, including, I think, integration of this data really integrated into vehicles and infrastructure and systems. So that's pretty exciting. My last slide, stolen from the Space News. In the same edition, they had this really handy chart of Earth observation as a service ecosystem. The first thing I noticed about this thing was that there's 3 flags on it, and they all have a lot of stars on them, which I thought was kind of interesting, because obviously flag makers are interested in the night sky. I don't know. But I think, what I took away from this is a few things. First of all, we can't be naive. As technicians, we need to understand that policy is really important. And you see these 3 ecosystems on this chart, and we know that these are the 3 main blocks currently in tension around the globe. And so despite the fact that we have this beautiful creation here, it touches on the real world. And we hear reticence and hesitation from some European colleagues that don't want data, which is otherwise free and open, uploaded to Amazon or used on Amazon because it's a US-based system. On the other hand, I don't know anyone yet, and I can think of someone on this call who might be involved in Alibaba Cloud, but I'm guessing that not everyone here is rushing towards uploading their data to the Chinese cloud. So there are real world tensions, and technically we need to be aware. On the other hand, I think the policy community and policymakers need to understand that technical people can make their own worlds. And that's what I see here. These are worlds. I mean, if I had to sketch out kind of a dream scenario of what might happen with Earth observation, this is great. This is it. We've got big companies, small companies, startups. We've got people investing in building services on top of really powerful infrastructure. And they're real. They're real places that people really do work. And I think, the policy side has to also adjust and understand that, you can resist the car for as long as you want, but eventually you're going to need to start building roads and putting up signs and things like that to help enable some of these worlds really realize their full potential. So I think it's a huge opportunity here. And I was really pretty stoked actually to see this in the Space News. It was really good. It also made me think, if this is an end state, I don't think it's an end state, but it could be a false summit. And we have this beautiful cloud world, but what kills the cloud? And part of the answer could be political tensions and countries putting up great firewalls and things like that. That is definitely something that could disrupt some of these business models. In fact, within China, I wasn't able to access Google services when I was there. So you probably can't access Up42 or Earth Engine or One Atlas or Planet Labs on Google Cloud in China. So there's already trouble there. My technician's answer to what kills the cloud is a little bit what Taufik mentioned in the very introduction, which is around edge computing. And it's probably a bit of hyperbole to say that it kills the cloud. It doesn't, but I think that's the next kind of step here, putting some of these technologies closer to the edge. We see chip manufacturers, ironically, except Intel, but Apple and others, AMD, optimizing their chips for low power, high compute, and they want to put these things on the edge of the network. They don't want to be in a big data center that has to be connected to a hydroelectric dam to run. They want to be able to operate at really low power. And so I think, what you might see in a sort of 5-10 year time frame is this cloud is a basis, a foundation, and on the outskirts of that, you have a lot of interesting edge devices. We have Spiral Blue is trying to launch and is launching compute into space. We have the European Space Agency, launching machine learning satellite and actually building a platform which allows you to upload your software to space hardware. These are all sort of on the European Space Agency, they're research missions, but I think that's the direction that we're going in. So I think this is a beautiful sort of false summit. It is a peak, but I think we've got a lot more potential here. So that's most of what I had to say. Sorry, I'm shuffling papers here. I was going to pass over to Stephen just to say a couple things about Symbios. As I mentioned, he is the founder of Symbios. So yeah, I'd like to invite him up and get him to say a couple things, and then we'll go to the questions.
Do you hear me, George? Okay.
Yes. Well.
Cool. Okay. Thanks a lot. That was great talk. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Yeah. So it's just a very, very short plug for us, not the company, but the possibility of anyone who might be interested in working with us. We've got Libby on the call, who's a final year student at the University of Sydney doing maths and physics. And we're interested to know if anyone else would like to get some work experience with us. As George said, we're a very small company, but we've been working in Australia since 2000. I'm coming from Europe and Japan, and George from Canada. We do have an office normally in the UK because we do a lot of work for ESA, and if we didn't have one, we couldn't do that. You see all the logos there that George had larger earlier on. We work for a lot of space agencies around the world, as well as some big industry players, including a lot in Japan, and because of our links there. Next one, George, please. So just there's a list of the kind of work that we do. George said it: program management, market studies, policy support, a lot of Earth observation, and most of it international. Though we're heavily working with Geoscience Australia and CSIRO. We write a lot at a senior level, like for the Paris Climate Conference, trying to sell politicians and science ministers why they need Earth observation. They can't possibly tackle climate change if they don't have Earth observation, because they'll be deaf, dumb, and blind. So things like that. And we get a lot of great exposure at a very senior level. We also get to do a lot of really cool travel. Normally, 2020, not so much. We're getting on a plane together to go to Canberra on Monday for the first time in about 15 months. But, the year before that, we were in Alaska, Vietnam, Milan, Rome, Paris, Tokyo. We get to go a lot of really great places and work with a really great community in the space agencies in particular. If anyone was working with us, it'd be from wherever you are. We're virtual. So, and we're flexible. We do have to do some late nights, like as George said, I was up till midnight the last night on the Paris Climate Agreement, global stock take. The space agencies are working out a strategy for, and we're right in the middle of that. So, that's really important stuff that we're doing there. We would like to have a look at you and let you have a look at us if you want to work in this area, so that we understand that this kind of work, there's pros and cons, right? So you're working from where you are. It gives you flexibility. You get this amazing travel, but sometimes it can be a bit solitary. We do get together around the world, and sometimes for weeks at a time. But so it does take a certain kind of person and a certain kind of mindset. So we wouldn't like somebody to be dropped in on that cold. So, a day a week or 2 days a week or whatever we can work out between us is what we do. So there's the email there if you want to get in touch with us. Please feel free to ask questions or follow up, and that will come to all of us to read. So that's the plug, George.
Great. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Okay, I'll put this up, Taufik. I think you were going to channel some questions. I thought this is from Capella Space, really cool SAR image that they put out recently, and it took me a while to work out what was going on. But Taufik, happy for any questions before we break off into the groups or tables, sorry.
Yep. Thanks, George. Thanks, Stephen. Round of applause for them both. Everyone, please. Woo! Do a physical one. I'm just putting in a link in the chat for some event feedback, so please do fill that out if you have not done so previously. So I guess some questions. I guess we'll start with, as questions start to come in the chat, please just put in the chat any questions that you may have. So some initial comment. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize. Hi, Carlo. We can't hear you too well, Carlo. Oh, off he goes. Yeah, please keep your questions in the chat, ideally. I'm not sure how that actually happened. That was interesting. Yeah, James was asking about what's happening in the synthetic aperture radar image.
Yeah, well, look, I did have to ask a colleague of ours, Oke Rosenquist, who lives in Japan. He's a big, tall Swedish man, and he knows more about SAR than anyone that I know. The radar, it's a radar image, so it's a flash of radar that's then bounces back and received, and that's the river. The black bit is the river. I'm not sure if it's the Hudson River. It might be the Hudson River, but it's one of the rivers in New York. And so the top of it is the main reflection off the bridge, and then the stuff below is sort of a double bounce off the water. So the radar is bouncing off the water, off the deck, off the water, and back to the satellite, and off the sort of suspended rope as well. So yeah, SAR is a whole other world. In terms of Earth observation, it brings a whole new set of capabilities. It's more like listening than looking, if anyone's ever sort of thought about it. And it's great, works at nighttime, works through clouds, and Sentinel-1 is the first sort of free and open radar satellite that we've had. And so that's, it's been really exciting to see people get their hands on the data, because it previously had been kind of hard. But yeah, Capella is obviously got a very high resolution commercial SAR imager, and they put this out as a part of, I think it was President's Day. That might be a bridge named after a president. So yeah.
Very cool. We had some comments from Alex Leith, Assistant Director of Digital Earth Australia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Card4L was something I was skeptical of, but I keep hearing about European initiatives prioritizing it, as well as USGS and GA and so on. Africa is 3.9 times the size of Australia, not sure actual area. And then there's a link to Digital Earth Africa, as well as the size of Africa. So was that something that you wanted to respond to, George?
Yeah, I mean, that's good info. I knew it was quite big. Africa's, I think, yeah, like Alex said, a lot bigger than Australia. He did mention Card4L. That's something we've been involved with. It's an attempt at describing standards for analysis-ready data. So essentially pre-processing of satellite data to make it easier for people to use to try and remove a lot of the pre-processing. And I see that later on, Alex said that, they have global ARD for Sentinel-2 and a number of Landsat missions and Sentinel-1 available. And I think that the point there is that, so Landsat is called Landsat, but yet for a long time, the product that was used was top of atmosphere. So the top of the atmosphere was the product, but it's the land that's the target of the satellite. And so essentially ARD tries to take the product from the top of atmosphere, subtract the atmosphere in a systematic way, and make it ready for analysis of the land. It's not called top of atmosphere sat, it's called Landsat. And same with Sentinel-2, it's also optical imager. Sometimes it doesn't matter, it depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to qualitatively have a look at where ships are moving and stuff, then maybe it doesn't matter so much for you. But now that we have these huge and deep time series archives of satellite data, having them pre-processed to a consistent standard is quite important to make the most of the value in the data sets. And so that's really, I think, to my mind, what ARD and Card4L is trying to get at.
Yeah, and there's a follow-up question from Alex as well. What do you see is the next big bottleneck to getting Earth observation into decision-making pipelines?
Yeah, for some reason in the last couple days, I keep hearing that the BBC writes all of its content for 8th graders. And I think there's a bit of that. There's a communications challenge that exists, and policymakers, especially politicians, I think just don't have the time to go so deep, and we need to really try and more clearly show the benefits of Earth observation. So that's one of the things that we really focus on. It's also a real grind, like we were saying, getting these handbooks produced and getting this information into the hands of people deciding this stuff can't just be done with a tweet. Maybe TikTok could do it, I don't know, but it's a sustained campaign. And one of the people we worked with in India, he has since retired, but he said it took him 20 years for the Department of Agriculture to realize that their satellite-derived products were useful for agricultural monitoring. And that was just telling them again, then someone quits, someone moves on. So I guess, the superposition of information, just putting it all out there is necessary, but it does take drive and finding the right person, and sometimes getting a bit of a break as well. So I wish I knew the actual bottleneck, but I think it's really getting the messages out there and sustained effort to really try and communicate the values. So
I think there's some good models there in the broader space industry, especially in Australia. For a long time, space did have that giggle factor, and a lot of people put in a lot of effort to overcome that. So there may be something we can learn from that.
Like beat me up, Scotty, to launch the space agency.
And the next question was from Jessica Raspal, who is a graduate from UTS. You mentioned the SDGs being used now as criteria for investment, but as you know, the SDGs were created in 2012. Do you think the 2012 SDGs are still appropriate or effective?
First of all, I always...
Sorry to interrupt you there, George, and Stephen did actually give a small response to that, so I guess I'll let you both figure out who wants to answer that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say something similar about the Millennium Development Goals, but just before Stephen goes, I'll just say they did include a number in them this time. So it's the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and I think in that way there's an inbuilt reset, and so probably as time goes on they get less appropriate, and hopefully there's a reset. But I'll let Stephen say what he wants to say.
No, I think that's good, George. I think it's easy to be quite cynical about this, especially as you get older, because you've seen it all before. The very first Earth observation handbook we wrote was for the Rio conference in 1992. Some of you might not even been born then. And that was a major milestone in terms of awareness of environmental problems. It's hard to overstate how important that was. And a number of key conventions came out of that conference. 10 years later, Rio Plus 10 was, I think it was in Johannesburg, and they tried to recreate the magic. And one of the things that kind of flowed from that was the Millennium Development Goals. And they kind of fizzed out, I would say, and Sustainable Development Goals came out of it. A lot of it, I would caution, is UN agencies creating a currency to improve their own budgets. So you have to be aware of that. And we see this all the time in our world with WMO, UNEP, UNOSA, and all that messy world. And yes, there is definitely a bit of tribalism and bureaucracy and inefficiency. On the other hand, it is a way to track a whole load of important measures in a way that allows you to see where we're heading generally, and allows space data to respond to. So I have both positive and negative views on all of that. It just depends on, of course, the implementation and human nature being as it is, it's not straightforward.
Thanks for that, Stephen. So there was an admin question regarding the recording of this talk. So as Gavin did reply, we'll send a recording to anyone that specifically requests it. But we're developing our own sort of internal process we're probably going to have a blog post come out with the recording as part of that at some point. We just need to get around to setting that up. So the next question is from Jasmine Muir, who is the EO Tech Lead at Frontier SI. Thanks for coming, Jasmine. Do you see room for more Earth observation data processing platforms in the current market?
Well, I can have a crack at that. I think, well, first of all, I don't think any of the current platforms have nailed it. So in that way, yes, I see more room. I think it's still up for grabs, the whole thing, the whole, the winner, as it were. Whether it's a winner take all or a couple of winners take all, I think it's hard to say. And I'd say it's almost more likely that we'll see some consolidation. Especially some of these activities like the DIOSs in Europe are highly dependent on government funding, and as well, to a certain extent, TELUS that we worked with in Japan. And so I think once that funding gets pulled out or unwound, we're going to see some of these entities, in fact, fall back and either fall into one another in an amalgamation kind of way, or consolidate in some way or another. It'll be interesting to see how well a provider like Planet competes in this space. I still have the impression that they don't quite know what their platform looks like, and so that's an interesting one because they obviously have a lot of space infrastructure. Whether they can win or not, I'm not sure, but I think there's a few space data provider ones that have other businesses, and this is an add-on to their business, and they might have a shot at sort of a winner-take-all scenario. But yeah, I think consolidation is almost more likely than net adding more, but I could see new ones that maybe hit a certain niche and really find a killer app. Agriculture would be one example. We looked at Earthcast a lot last year as a business. They've kind of fallen apart. They went bankrupt, and there was a lot of bad things. But their technical vision is really around machine learning for agriculture. And if they kept that kind of focus, then maybe that vertical would be enough to get them there. So, yeah, that's a long answer, Justin, but that's what I think.
Could I just add a little supplement, George?
Yeah, of course.
Just to say, we did some consulting for TELUS, the Japanese platform, over the last few years, and the message we give to them is the message I would give to everyone else, really. It's just standardization is really important, and leverage what everyone else is doing. That's why we were so keen to get involved in the Open Data Cube and try and basically link everyone together, because there's so much data out there and the user doesn't care so much about the provenance of the pixels. We're going to have to mix everything that we've got so that Earth observation kind of realizes its full potential. And so I think standardization, rather than more platforms, although big ones like Microsoft, they're a bit late compared to Google and Amazon, but they're making a big play. They're coming for sure. And I'm sure there will be a bit of VHS and Betamax war, but so as George says, probably some consolidation, maybe some pragmatic collaboration using standards like analysis ready data and Open Data Cube. But I just hope it works in our favor, in favor of society, in favor of mankind, and not just commerce, because these things have got great power, as George has tried to communicate in the last half an hour.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Stephen and George. And so final question for now. So again, from Jessica, do you think that if a new set of SDGs were released, would this affect the market? Or do you think investors would again be slow to adopt or value them in their decision making?
Well, I think that would be, if I was managing the SDGs, I would try and make as much continuity as possible to what had already been done. Like Stephen said, the MGDs kind of died, and they were probably a foundation for what came. But I think they should focus on continuity and allowing people who have bought in to continue to buy in, but just update them, maybe add some new parameters. We work a lot with a group called GCOS, the Global Climate Observing System, and every number of years they update their list of essential climate variables, taking on board new factors, new information needs, new technologies, but it's an evolution rather than a revolution. So I think that the SDGs would be wise to take the same kind of approach rather than blowing it all up and starting again, just having a real rethink and trying to evolve them to stay relevant and build that brand rather than start from the beginning, as it were. People recognize the SDGs, for better or for worse. I think Stephen's answer was very fair. They're not perfect, but they have a brand, and I hope they don't try and start all over again. So.
All right, there was one last question. This one will be the last, I promise. So if you have any more questions, please do stick around afterwards. George and Stephen will be able to stick around until about 7:30. So we'd be happy to have a chat with you all after this. So Chrysler Anderson's question, he's the CEO of Pandion AI. Is there a need for even faster information with direct download to personnel in the field to monitor, for example, disasters? For example, edge computing in the satellite.
Yeah. Well, the direct download to personnel in the field, I think satellites have never been great at being timely for people in the field. Of course, satellite communications is useful, like a satellite phone, and we have someone like Starlink making internet basically ubiquitous, so that's an interesting possibility. But generally speaking, the data has flowed through a kind of operations center, someone making a product that can then be sent out to someone in the field a number of hours later. Could that be better? I think yes, for sure. I have seen some trials and work around using drones, say, to manage fires, like wildfire situations. And having the sensor right there and being able to, say, get a thermal image through a fire is really valued by people in the field. But I think satellite technology, it's not always going to be limited, but right now it's certainly limited in its ability to directly transmit. The second bit is kind of about edge computing in the satellite, and I think like double thumbs up to that idea. I think, again, it's going to be question of finding the right problem to solve for, say, having a machine learning kind of algorithm, or any kind of algorithm. It doesn't mean machine learning, it can just be heuristics or any kind of algorithm on the satellite, say, to trigger more detailed observations, trigger follow-ups. I think that kind of stuff has a lot of potential. Maybe at first disasters will be rich territory because by definition they're out of the norm. So like a fire is an area where it's just generally hotter than it's supposed to be. That's one definition of it. But yeah, I think disasters is probably a good area for that.
All right. Thank you so much, George and Stephen. Gavin, would you be able to come in and wrap up this section?
Hey, yes, thank you so much to George and Stephen for their talk. So if everyone could just do a nice little applause emoji at the bottom, that would be great. So yes, thank you, George and Stephen. It was a very, very insightful talk, and thank you so much for collaborating with us to help bring the community even closer. So right now what we'll do is we'll end this speaker talk session. We do have about 15 minutes to have a chat. So what everyone can do is that they can go back to the lounge and you can join a table and feel free to start talking to each other, talk about if you learn anything and how this might impact you. It'd be really good to see everyone just chatting with each other. So thank you, everyone. I'll see you at the lounge.
Thanks, Gavin. Oh, I did not put in the right thing. Let's try that again.